Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us on today's webinar, From Cost Center to Profit Center, Mining Machine Data, brought to you by Technology Services Industry Association and sponsored by Glassbeam. My name is Inga Entriago, your moderator for today. Before we get started, we have just a few housekeeping items. Audio is routed through your computer speakers. If you encounter audio quality or technical issues, let us know right away via the questions panel. You may access full screen view via the toggle button located at the top right area of the console. We do encourage you to ask questions at any time via the questions panel. If you don't get to your question today, we will follow up with you via email. And finally, a link to the recorded version of today's webinar and the PDF of the presentation will be sent out in the next 24 hours via email. Once again, thank you for taking the time to join us today. I would now like to introduce our presenters today. Jeremy Delatezzi, Director, Research, Data Analytics for TSIA, and Carlos Quezada, Senior Director of Customer Solutions for Glassbeam. We do have a lot of exciting content to share in the next 30 minutes, so let's go ahead and get started by turning things over to our first presenter. Jeremy, over to you.
Thanks, Inga, and welcome everybody to this great topic here of interest to lots of TSIA members, from Cost Center to Profit Center, mining machine data. So TSIA, we have a perspective that as you approach these topics related to data-driven insights and data-driven processes, that you really need to have a firm strategy in place. And it's more than just about measuring machine data, measuring how customers are using your product, but it's really about the process of taking a scientific approach to understand how this machine data and how your customers use your products, use your services, in a way that leads to them finding success. So if you think about, you have an outcome to achieve, maybe it's increasing your revenue growth, increasing your win rates, increasing the quality of your services, or maybe it's an outcome that your customer would like to reach. That's where we start with our strategy. What is the outcome that we're trying to achieve either for us and or for our customer? Add some data to the mix. Maybe you are starting to look into how you can tap into machine data and all the different metrics that can be derived from that. What this imagery is indicating is that there are lots and lots of different data points that might ultimately impact those outcomes. We need a process, a scientific process, to identify what are those few metrics or KPIs that really influence outcomes. And then as you bring your full data analytics strategy together, you have lots of different ways in which you can influence your customers, creating new offers, creating new services, intervening throughout the process. What are the few success plays that really impact those most meaningful KPIs that impact your outcomes? So that's the basics of our consumption analytics strategy perspective at TSIA. Now to add to that perspective, we've been doing some polling, doing some surveys to find out what are the consumption and machine data metrics that are accessible by service organizations. We launched our first annual survey to that effect last winter, and while there is no common practice yet emerging from the data, there are definitely some data points that are less accessible. So 35 to 45% of respondents have access to basic product usage and number of users. But as soon as we jump into more granular, rich information that could be found in machine log files, such as feature use and service interactions and specific users, only 14 to 30% of our respondents said that they had access to that information. And even with those that do have the access, you can just tell from the comments in the survey that the technology and the practices and processes in place are still rather fragmented and a bit immature. The next set of questions we sought to answer with that survey, and again with our continuing research in this area, is, well, how are members measuring these consumption data points in this machine data? And again, there's no dominant method. For example, the most frequent one was that they track starts of the machine or starts of the software or logins into the product with some basic tools. 15 to 40% of respondents use other usage signals such as amount of time in product, click patterns, memory process. Lots and lots of data, lots and lots of different ways to track the information. And what you'll find even within one company that's been at this for a few years trying to figure out this right success recipe is that there are a variety of different approaches and data streams to take into consideration even within one organization. As you see the quote here, we have a variety of products and metrics for tracking usage that vary. Some products, transactional use is the main data source. For Document Manager, we track another way of measuring usage, and that is total hard drive space. Lastly, we're most concerned with not just if you're measuring and how you're measuring, but what are you doing with that consumption and with that machine data. And again, we see an emerging capability, an emerging field here. One of the most common benefits that our members are getting out of this type of data is internal indicators of health. So for your customers, which are more healthy, which are less healthy. We have some more advanced capabilities being created by members. 30 to 40% are creating proactive capabilities instead of being a typical reactive, perhaps service organization, becoming more proactive, identifying root problems before they turn into actual problems. Lastly, what's the value that you can expect to get out of a mature and developed analytics capability built on top of granular data? That data is still emerging. We're seeing preliminary results, not just on what members are telling us is happening, but looking at their actual metrics. So here's a quick graph from that most recent survey, just looking at service revenue growth. Are you or are you not measuring consumption data and machine data? Just starting that process can create this virtual cycle to some success. So to sum up, the value's there. Monitoring and leveraging consumption machine data is starting to bring value to service organizations. But there are definitely many paths. It probably stems from the fact that there are many different data points when you get down to that particular level. So it's an emerging field with many different paths forward, and that's why we can happily turn it over to Carlos so he can tell us how Glassbeam is making sense of this data. Over to you, Carlos.
Thanks for that, Jeremy. And good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carlos Quesada. I'm the Senior Director of Customer Solutions for Glassbeam. A little bit about myself, about 15 years of industry experience in the support space. Most recently, I ran a worldwide support organization that was geographically spread out across 3 different continents. And one of the things that I'll be talking about today is essentially, how you go and use some of the data being collected today from the support organization and turn that into opportunities for services and revenue. But before that, a little bit about the company. So Glassbeam is essentially a cloud analytics company. And what we've done is we've taken the technology and wrapped solutions around it. So some of our customers include IBM, Aruba Network. And essentially what we're doing is we're taking a different approach to just your standard analytics. We actually are able to create actions based on the analytics collected. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But specifically we focus around a couple of areas. One of them is Internet of Things. So we actually help IoT players have better visibility into their install base, as well as being able to take a look at trends and growth. The goal of the discussion today is specifically, review how some of the machine data that's being collected today can not only streamline some of the processes within the support organization, but also, where there are opportunities are there for revenue, improved customer satisfaction, and higher visibility into the customer. So talking about your common support model. So for the most part, depending on the maturity level of support organization, typically, by default, are offering things like standard warranty, which is typically, very light phone support, repair and return with maybe 30-day turnaround times for hardware products. Probably a little bit different for software organizations. You're probably on the hook also to provide some level of phone support or email support to your customers, as well as a level of software upgrades for the same for the product. The thing I want to call out here is, every one of these is another. Once you start growing from that perspective and you start maturing the organization, then you go into offering premium support services to customers. And typically, these are, offering customers tighter SLAs, also doing a little bit more advanced hardware replacements, getting a little bit more fancy with what you do with your products, offering on-site replacements. Then additionally, most commonly people will go and say, this is a pretty important account for us. Dedicate some resources for the account. The important thing to note in this conversation is that every one of these items is another cost. It's another resource that gets thrown at it. So although you're growing your product SKUs within the support organization to kind of strengthen your support portfolio, each one of these is actually going to incur an additional cost to be able to support. You have to think about, for example, if you start to offer premium services or dedicated service account managers, you have to figure out what your service account manager to actual critical account ratio is going to be. In most cases, you can typically handle maybe 5 to 7 critical accounts per service account manager before that person is either getting overloaded or has to reduce the scope of what he can do for that customer. What ends up happening is you have two choices at that point. You can either continue to throw people at the problem and try to scale that way, or you can go and start looking at other mediums like introducing technology to help you achieve some of those job functions as well. So the discussion today is, let's stop throwing more people at it. There's a lot of technology out there that can help you achieve some of these goals as well. The example here talks about, how can we go and leverage some of the information that's being collected today, streamline and accelerate these processes. And as a result of that, not only do you get improved customer satisfaction, which is extremely important in support organizations, but you also have the ability to offer additional services. So in this case, not only do we lower efficiency, but again, improve customer satisfaction, and then there's some additional opportunities for revenue as well. One of the things that's becoming very, very common is, we all see the big data announcements all the time. And really, what does all that mean? So what you really have to think about is there's a lot of value in all the data being collected. And the goal here is how can we monetize some of that data? So the example here talks about, every day when a support engineer picks up the phone or works with the customer remotely, at some point in time, there's a need to go and collect information from that customer's device, whether it's, a ATM machine to a network switch to whatever the product may be. A support engineer cannot do his job without data. The question is once that data is collected, what's done with that data? For the most part, that ends up being stored somewhere in a ticketing CRM system that's available only on that ticket. But then we miss the opportunity to get all the information about that particular product, how it was running. So, the first use case of the data is the support organization. They go and process that data to be able to do their job and troubleshoot. But if we were to store that data in a central repository, we could, in the back end, mine that data to also provide some additional services. And additionally, provide some feedback to product management on how that product was functioning, before it failed, after it failed, how the customer was using it. And the output of all of this data collection can be anything from a dashboard to automatic emails based on the condition, so we can do some support automation. Or in some cases, especially in the IoT space, you can actually go and, based on the collection of this data, you can form some rules and alerts where you can maybe even execute a script that will go and auto-correct a problem or defect in the field. The example I show here is a very common example for a Glasswing customer. So what you're looking at here is the entire end-to-end support ecosystem with our value add. So if you can imagine, you have a support organization that's maybe a tiered group. You have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. The tier 2, tier 3 guys have been in your organization for a while. They've kind of scaled up in the organization. The level 1 guys, are typically the freshers. They're pretty new. They're also your lowest cost asset in the organization. So if you can imagine, if you take the experience and the tribal knowledge from the upper tiers, you take advantage of some of the data that's already stored in your bug tracking system. If you're in the operations space, this could also be an ECO notice. So for example, if there's an engineering change order that needs to be communicated out to the field, you can do that on a one-off basis to the support organization. But nothing guarantees you that they're going to remember that when they're on the phone with the customer who's upset because their system is down. And the last thing is take some of the repair data that's available to be able to remind somebody in the field that there's a version of firmware that needs to be upgraded in order to solve the problem. So what you're looking at here is we go and process all that data and make it available in a central location. When a machine sends the data upstream or a customer manually uploads that data up to the cloud, what eventually happens is we automatically go and find those known issues or those use cases and make them available to the Tier 1 support engineer immediately. Something that typically would take anywhere from 20 minutes to 30 minutes to maybe even an hour to discover is immediately made available to the customer or the support engineer. And by virtue of that, you've improved customer satisfaction because your first call resolutions go up, and you've also strengthened the knowledge in the support organization because Tier 1 is now being able to close tickets and move them much faster. And the majority of your tickets are going to stay in the first level versus escalating up due to SLA restrictions. So what I'm trying to get at here is taking advantage of the data that's being collected by the support engineers really enables an opportunity to offer over-the-top services. So if you remember my first slide, I talked about some of the advanced services that are typically available today, but all of those incur an additional cost. With using the data that's collected from the support organizations, there's actually a number of other items that can be offered as either additional service offerings or augment the existing service offerings you may have. For example, if you have a customer who is sending data, or they have the ability for their machines to call home, you can go and automate a function where on a periodic basis a health check is made available to that customer. This is a premium service that customers would be paying for, where you could basically on a weekly basis or daily basis get a report with an overall summary of how your system is operating. Additionally, in most cases, along with a premium account manager or service account manager, there are these quarterly visits or monthly visits where the account manager comes and reviews the account with the customer. In this case, the ingestion of all this data can actually prepare the dashboards and the reports that are used to really manage those discussions with the customer. And it also gives you a level of consistency across all your service account managers, so the look and feel of all those reports is pretty consistent. Additionally, there's also an opportunity to go and provide usage statistics and updates on licensing and feature usage to those customers as well. As well as another level of over-the-top service is the proactive service. So along the same lines, aside from just being able to provide you the routine health checks, there's also an opportunity for proactive alerting. And the most common use case, or the one that resonates the most and it's easiest to understand, is if you can imagine you have a hardware component that's got a redundant power supply, and you've enabled the call home feature for that particular product. In this case, the system would automatically generate an alert indicating that a redundant power supply has failed. So then the system could then potentially go and automatically create a ticket for the customer. That ticket is already cross-checked with the customer's level of service, so they're entitled to advanced replacement. Then the system can automatically generate an RMA, and the RMA is scheduled to be shipped out to the customer. And the customer receives a notification that we've detected that the power supply has gone down, and that a replacement is scheduled to ship out without the customer ever picking up the phone. And then lastly, again, this goes to the enhanced self-service. This is proactive problem notifications or proactive problem resolution. So once you've built the intelligence into the system, it's very easy to make the leap to be able to make this functionality available to a customer or a premium customer on their support portal. So for example, let's say that you're an administrator of a particular network and you want to go in, your system's operating a little bit sluggish and you're wondering if there's something coming on or if it's a precursor of something bigger that may be happening. You can go and the customer themselves can take the same log files they would normally send to support, upload them via the support portal, and immediately get a response from the system with the same type of responses that a support engineer would provide them. Basically, here are the high-level items that are being called out based on the knowledge built into the system. Additionally, all the data that's being collected by support engineers every day is also, there's an opportunity to also use that data as a lead engine. So if you can imagine that you go and you review all of the data collected over the 1 week or 1 month period collected by support, you can go and use that data to figure out which customers are using a back rev level of code that's so far back that in order to bring them up to speed, it probably requires some hand-holding and some PS engagement. So there's an opportunity to take that data and actually create leads to the professional services organization to reach out to those customers and offer to help them upgrade to their system. Additionally, the most obvious one is being able to take a look at the customer's capacity and being able to target the customers where we feel that maybe they're on the road to running out of capacity relatively quickly, so that can automatically become another lead to reach out to those customers and upgrade them to the larger capacity widget or whatever product may be, as well as license expirations and feature upgrades. One other thing is automating that and building that into your SFDC or CRM will also greatly improve some of those efficiencies. The other component to talk about is, once we have the data, we've been using it for support, we've been able to leverage it to provide some additional over-the-top services. There's also a third component to this, which is really taking a look at the usability. And this basically goes along with, providing dashboards and reports to your product management or engineering or even marketing team. So, for example, taking a look at the features that customers are most commonly using and how they're using them. The product distribution. So, what are the mix match of products that your customers are using? A lot of times QA wants to get configs from customer deployments so that they can introduce those into their test beds. That information is also available when you introduce a central repository of the customer logs. Additionally, the engineering team wants to know how quickly or how efficiently customers are adopting the latest version of code, and they also want to know, what is the oldest version of code out in the field to be able to plan their sustaining engineering efforts. So this will help them drive, how many back rev versions of code need to be supported in the next version of code. And most importantly, quick generation of executive summary reports. So imagine giving a report at the exec briefing on how the install base is doing, how the last version of code is doing, correlated with the number of tickets increased based on the last adoption of that particular version of code. So there's definitely a lot of really good uses of the data that's being collected every day by support. I think the mistake that's made is that data is retained individually inside of a ticket-by-ticket case basis, where once you get that data and you bring it into a central repository, for example, like the Glassbeam Cloud, there's quite a bit of services that can be offered to provide those solutions. Now, here's an example, or my opinion, of how you could introduce this particular model into a support organization. As I mentioned, typically you start by collecting logs every day during the support process. If you go and you manage to get those logs in a central repository, then you can start applying some install base analytics behind that, and immediately start taking a look at your penetration of a particular version of firmware, your feature sets, anything along those lines. Once you're familiar with the data and you figure out what's there and what's not, then you can start building some advanced service programs around those. If anything, if you already have an advanced or premium account service offering, leveraging this tool to help drive those reports that the service account managers use to deliver that message every week or every quarter will actually streamline the process and make their job a lot easier, as well as improve that consistent look and feel across all the different service account managers. At some point after that, you can actually start creating customer-facing dashboards that are either delivered to the customer automatically via email or made available via the customer support portal. And then lastly, support automation. So an example of this is customers who have some legacy product who maybe are looking to move away from providing the detailed technical support for this product. It's about to be sunset. There's an opportunity to build automation so that customers can go and self-help or self-troubleshoot these products by uploading the logs into their customer support portal and immediately receiving a response from the system where we built the intelligence with next steps and knowledge base articles directly correlated to the errors that were received when scrubbing those logs. And again, this cycle will continue to go through as new products are introduced, new versions of codes are available, and so there's really a lot of different service offerings that can really strengthen the support organization by growing the service offerings that are available and bringing in some additional revenue. So, in summary, I think don't overlook the value of the data collected every day with a support engineer. Everything is there. There you have versions of code and configuration. The goal is take that information, put it in a central repository, and take a look at the different items that we discussed today as opportunities for additional revenue. That concludes my presentation. One thing I did want to mention is we will be at the TSW show coming up in May. So if you're at the show and have any more questions, please come visit us. We'll be at booth 40. And with that, Inga, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Carlos, for a very informative and insightful presentation. And yes, we are moving into the Q&A portion of today's webinar. And if you do have any questions for Carlos or Jeremy, we do encourage you to take this time to ask those questions via the questions panel. Our first question is for Carlos. What kind of log files do you process, and how complex can they be?
Yeah, that's a good question, Inga. So the power of Glassbeam is we actually can ingest any type of log file. So differently from some of the other common analytic systems out there who are more used to ingesting SNMP logs or syslogs, we can ingest any type of structured or unstructured data. And in some examples, we're actually receiving log files from converged systems where there's multiple platforms. So we actually can ingest the data from all 3 or 4 different platforms, collect them together, aggregate them, and present dashboards or solutions based on all that. So any type of data, whether it's machine data or sensor data, we're pretty much agnostic to any type of file structure that may be thrown out.
Great, thank you, Carlos. The next question is, what are some of the biggest challenges that you run into during implementation?
So some of the biggest challenges we run into during implementation are really getting beyond the fact that there's just a lot of data to be consumed. So one of the things that we typically ask is that we work with the support managers to identify the top 3 support issues that they see. And this is something that's relatively available to any support organization. So you start taking the top 1 or 2 issues, most common issues in your Tier 1 organization. And then you work back from that. So you start talking about, when you're troubleshooting this particular issue, what log files you go to confirm this issue, what parameters need to be looked at to be able to determine whether this is in a critical state, in a good state, or in a bad state. And we build those rules into the system. So the next time that problem occurs, we immediately call them out and, again, provide them to the support engineer or the customer directly. So it's a matter of just, again, working your way through the process. You start with some of the most common problems and then add complexity as you go along.
Great. We do have, our next question is for Carlos. How do you build the knowledge into the system?
That's a great question. So most support organizations already have a concept of a knowledge base. So what we do is we leverage the knowledge base, and as I mentioned in my presentation, we also leverage tribal knowledge from the support engineers, as well as leveraging some of the engineering bug databases and repair databases as well. So as we're building out the rules and alerts that will fire off when the logs are scrubbed, what we do is we couple those with the either existing knowledge base articles, or we take some of the tribal knowledge from the support organization to be able to let us know what values we should be looking for. So it's really a discovery phase at the beginning when we start building the initial set of rules. But more importantly, as the product matures, we do have the capability of leveraging what we call machine learning, or a little bit of artificial intelligence. But once you have a big enough sample of your install base, we can actually use machine learning capabilities to go and basically compare this particular log against what we consider normal across the install base and call that out. So there is an opportunity to do automatic rule detection as well.
Great, thank you, Carlos. So we are coming to the conclusion of today's webinar. I would like to take this time to thank Jeremy and Carlos for a very, very insightful and informative presentation today. And I just want to remind everyone on today's webinar that a link to the recorded version of today's presentation and the PDF will be sent out in the next 24 hours via email. Thank you to everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us on today's TSIA webinar, From Cost Center to Profit Center, Mining Machine Data, sponsored by Glassbeam. And we look forward to seeing you at our next TSIA webinar. Have a great day, everyone.